Hello, I'm Crisia Kip and Florina Jelescu, and we are country managers at Genially. Welcome to our roundtable, e-learning in the age of information overload, where we all take a look at concepts, strategies, and useful tools to improve engagement in online training. The online world offers many benefits to training, but it also possesses a number of challenges that trainers must overcome. For example, in the online environment, there are so many stimuli that keeping focus and attention is almost impossible, right? So what is the best way to get learners engaged with training materials? What content competes most effectively with all the other distractions that steal learners' attention?
So, good point, Chris. Actually, sometimes we need to innovate and create learning experiences that work well online, face-to-face, or in hybrid environments, while keeping the company's objectives in mind, of course. In order to address these challenges from a practical perspective, we invited 3 training professionals who are currently working in corporate environments to share their experiences. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mo Ash, Learning Architect at the Catalyst, Rhys Coleman, Training Manager at Crowd, and Mike Taylor, our capability consultant. Mike will gonna join us soon. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
It's our pleasure. For having us. Really appreciated that you've invited us here. I'm looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. Well, before starting, we are delighted to announce that you can request a free 1-month trial of our master plan.
Yes.
Please keep in mind that this offer is only available to those with a free or pro account and can be requested until November 5th. We will share the form in this chat so you can fill the form. And a quick reminder, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and we'll reply once we finish the roundtable discussion. So, shall we start, guys? Are you ready?
Let's go for it.
Are you ready? So let's do it.
Okay.
Bring it on.
Okay, so here goes the first question. Do you think that training is changing at the same pace as the online environment, or it is a few years behind? I'd love to know your thoughts.
So the real question is, who goes first, I guess?
It's a cool first question.
knowing Mo's expertise, I think it's probably best if I go first, get some of my thoughts out of the way, because he is a genius after all.
Hey!
So I think there is an element in my head. I think the training environment will always be ever so slightly behind the online one. I think the reason is that there is always, with any line of work, it takes an amount of time to get used to the things made possible by the technology you're provided with. So I think, given that the online environment is always changing and everybody can contribute to that as well, I think with training material, there's always that little learning period, I think, where you need to learn how to use certain tools or to communicate with people in a different way. But the positive side of that, as far as I see it, is the continuous progression leads to setting really good examples for engagement. So you can look at things like social media, I think, where they have they're very well practiced at keeping people's attention, and if you can harness some of those techniques, it can be really useful to be able to keep people's attention on training as well. I don't know whether you have any thoughts in that area, Mo.
That's a good point. Thank you so much.
Well, the point is that many people are complaining about Zoom fatigues and learning fatigues and virtual learning fatigue. But yet again, you still binge on a 6-hour, 7-hour series of episodes over Netflix because you just want to know who did what or who won the best cake. But it's a matter of agency. I mean, if I choose to binge, I would binge. If I choose to learn, I would learn. So there's this thing that we always say, that learning at the end of the day really depends on the learner's readiness to learn, not the goodness of the learning experience. Nevertheless, According to David Perkins, who's a professor of education at Harvard Graduate School of Teaching and Education, he did say that there are specific tenets that make up a really good experience. One of them is enhancing learners' curiosity. And enhancing learners' curiosity can be done by, we can turn our learning into TikToks. We can use microlearning. We can gamify with all the bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, is it really offering the learner choice? Is it really offering the learner cadence? Is it really letting the learner undertake intellectual challenges? Is it letting the learner take learning risks? So now the point is, with the amount of data that is dispersed and many choices that we have, learners are getting too curious, too challenged, and they're getting into a paradox of choice. What should I do? What should I work on? How can I get into that? So it's not a matter of if training is keeping up. Training needs to put some constraints to the learner in terms of, I want to focus your attention on this and you need to do that. Because all trainers and all instructional designers are looking into, I want to get into immersive experiences and AI and gamification. And
that's a good point.
Let's take learners into VR and let's create escape rooms, like actual escape rooms, so they can like roam around. I'm like, okay. Aren't you just taking it a tad bit too much? You need to put a little bit of restriction, like a little bit of constraints here, because we're trying to keep up with the change happening, not trying to make learners have everything in the world, but trying to let them have the essential things needed. And that's where we need to look into accessibility and equity. The concept of equity. Are all learners getting the same amount of attention? Are all learners being able to access the same way? Is it really speaking to the learner's means of user experience? Is it friendly to them? Is it helpful for them to do what needs to be done? And also, are all learners technology literate? Because you're thinking about like, let me roll out this state-of-the-art LMS. And the learner gets swooped into too much technology. And not all learners are technology literate as we think and we hope for them to be. So it's about onboarding the technology. It's about offering accessible aspects. It's about being equitable for neurotypical and neurodivergent people. And also it's not about putting everything for the learning, but putting what is necessary for them to do a specific action.
To have a purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're absolutely right, Mo. Actually, I'm speechless.
Yeah, but I agree, because I have heard that a lot of people want to start with gamification and they think that that's the whole thing. And you have to have the purpose of how I'm going to create this and a roadmap and everything to design everything that can achieve that goal that you have in mind. So I agree with you.
Indeed.
It's a very good point, really, because I think I've definitely in the past, I've definitely been guilty of thinking there's a new technology that's really exciting. You really want to get involved in it, but you're always thinking of it through the perspective of somebody who deals with training on a day-to-day basis. Whereas for most people, I think it's like with doctors, for example, where they deal with patients today, and they get so used to it that everything they say is very matter of fact and very normal to them. But then the people who are patients in that hospital don't necessarily go there every day. So that training experience, I think, like you were saying, Mo, I think it does need to have their kind of best interests at heart and giving them the correct things to be able to give them those skills. I think one thing that's helped us massively with that is we have been assisted by the technology that we use in some ways, in that it becomes a bit easier. Because there are more options for it. I say it becomes a bit easier. It becomes a bit easier once they're in that environment. Obviously, we're talking about the fact that there are lots of pulls on people's attention, but it also allows us to do things like we communicate with people around the world who work with. For a bit of context, anyway, my company works with freelancers around the world. They have access to our learning management system, and people have different needs and different questions that they need answering. And the technology, I think, has helped us in that, because I think pre the LMS that we're using, there would have been a lot of different ways that people would have tried to contact us, and it's helped us to streamline things in that way, in a similar way to what you were talking about, Mo, where it's people needing to have a bit of direction, that they're not necessarily going to be very experienced in going and finding their own training. So it's having the option to be able to be directed through things, which is something that we do on one level. And then for those other people who are maybe more experienced at finding their own training or want to go exploring, to have that option for them as well.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. And well, let's go to the second question. How can we adapt the face-to-face training content to the other environments? What's your opinion on this?
The other environments, as in like the other modalities, whether it was
Yeah, like the online environment, or yeah.
okay.
There are so many distractions.
Honestly, there's many talk about the sweet spot, like that sweet spot between synchronous and asynchronous, and how do we do our blending? So I believe that in our day and age, I like always use that because it makes me sound sophisticated. In our day and age, it's yes, in our day and age. So basically after COVID, we've always been using LMSs and we've always been using e-learning, but we've been a bit cautious about it because people are not very up for doing something different other than classroom trainings. And when we used to do it, with minute interventions, like simple interventions. Now, post-COVID, people are more used to the concept of going into a training that is conducted online via Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx, Adobe Connect, and so on and so forth. But this right here, what we're doing right here, it's not considered a training. Although certain people would waste 4 hours out of their life or 6 hours sitting in a Zoom call, considering it a training, which is not. And I always ask my students this very philosophical question. How many people do you think you're talking to in a Zoom training? And they'll be like, oh, 20, 10, 15. Like, think again. I said philosophical. How many? I'm telling them, okay, you're talking to one person. You're talking to one person at a time. In a classroom setting, you're dealing with a totally different animal. It's called the classroom. On Zoom, I'm talking right now, the only person that I'm seeing right now, and I'm having a conversation too right now, is Florina. She's seeing me, I'm seeing her. And I'm dealing with her distractions. I'm dealing with whatever that is happening in Chile right now, the environment, the weather, the internet issues, the barking dogs around you. This in a classroom, I can control this more, but here it's different. So you need to know that when you're doing a blend between synchronous, whether it was.
Oh, and now we'll never know.
Yes, you, Mo.
The blend between synchronous and asynchronous. I think I can, whilst Mo's internet behaves itself, I think I can definitely jump in and say a couple of things. I think.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Oh.
Hey, Mo.
You came back.
Oh, really?
You. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. And I thought you were with, okay, what did I miss? Where was I?
We got most of you. You were talking about synchronous and asynchronous learning. That's where we lost you.
Synchronous, and I said I usually ask a specific philosophical question. How many people am I talking to right now? So we have Rias, Chrisia, and Florina. Again, how many people am I talking to right now? I'm actually talking to one.
Absolutely.
I'm talking
One
to each and
single
every
person.
one of you at a time. In a classroom, in an actual classroom, I'm talking to a class. That's a totally different animal. That's a totally different person. In an online training, I'm only talking to Florina, who's in Chile, and I'm dealing with her distractions, with her weather, with her technical issues. I'm dealing also with Christia, wherever she is, and I'm dealing with Reyes, whatever he is going through. But in a classroom, I can I can contain it. So I need to make sure that what I'm treating here is different than what I'm treating here. And if I'm balancing this synchronous and this synchronous, it will be different cognitive strategies, and this take different cognitive strategies from me as a trainer or an instructor. And when I'm doing design, I need to cater it in a different way. Now, in order for me to swoop in from this to this, or to prepare from that to this, I need to use asynchronous learning, AKA I could use Genially, for example, which is something that I use with many of my students. So I use my Genially for asynchronous purposes, whether to highlight a specific value, build specific means of awareness before people come into class, or I reinforce after class via challenge, or I can build up an escape room for them, or do a quest or a quiz for them. But am I doing this on purpose? Yes. If I'm only using it because I'm using it, then it's called technology integration. It's not called blended learning. In order for blended learning to take place, 4 things need to come in line: the place, the path, the pace, and the time. You know exactly what time you're deploying asynchronous. That's where the sweet spot is. You know the pace of the learning and the cognition that goes from before to during to after. You're taking a complete path that goes alongside. And also, you know the place you're putting on this specific elements, and that's exactly what Reyes was just talking about. Is it accessible? Is it easy? Can I go on with it? Otherwise, your plan will just go berserk.
Absolutely. I think kind of what you're referring to there as well. I think the way of learning, as far as we're concerned, I can talk from being kind of an insider company perspective. I think we got very lucky because, as Mo says, I think COVID was a complete game changer for everything, for so many industries. In how it's worked for us for training, we're lucky to be part of a company, I think, where we were already quite well versed and quite digitally literate, because it is digital marketing. People need to know their tools and that kind of thing. I think that when it came to practical things that we may otherwise task people with, where we were physically unable to take people into a room and show them how something works, I think we've started building out things like practical tasks for people to be able to take. So we can, for example, give examples with certain training tools where we'll give an interactive tutorial of how a tool works, but then we'll ask them to go away and use that tool to pull out some information from that tool to be able to give us kind of a document that feeds back from it later on.
Thank you, Mike.
And therefore, we've also got kind of a way to be able to test people's abilities in those ways, but also as I was kind of talking before, the digital aspect of it helps to kind of line those things up, which means we can block out time to be able to do things like marking or responding to people and that kind of thing. So a lot of that luckily was set up for us, but I think it isn't a perfect replacement for everything we do. I think there's always got to be an in-person component, even if that was over COVID time where we physically couldn't see each other. It was taking advantage of those video calls. That's one positive thing I think that has come out of the pandemic, is that people are more digitally literate than they were, especially when it comes to video calls and that kind of thing. But I think they do need to be used in combination. Like Mo was saying, it's about that blended learning approach, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It needs to work for everybody, but it's been an absolutely invaluable crutch for us to be able to use for things that physically wouldn't have been possible. Even 10 years ago, there are some things that we physically couldn't have done as a company that we can do now because the technology enabled it.
It's like to be versatile, right?
Yes. Exactly, yeah. It enables us to do that, and then the onus on us as a training team then is to make the correct choice about when to use. And again, tying into what Mo was saying, when you're doing it for the sake of it, and when you're doing it because it is useful for the learner. So you've got to keep that front of mind all the time. Is just what is the best way for the learners to get this knowledge from us.
Yes.
Amazing. So welcome, Mike. Welcome
Hi,
to
so
this
sorry, guys.
roundtable. No worries. So let's talk about microlearning. I'm sure that you are familiar with this specific word. So I know that microlearning is trending right now. So what's your opinion about it? Have you adapted your content to it, or do you think it is less effective? Let's start. Who wants to go?
I'll say something since I was late. I should jump in here and volunteer. And so I think the whole micro learning thing, I think there's a reason that it's gotten so popular. I think I can appreciate the concept sort of efficiency of messaging. So if you can tell me something in 30 seconds, don't take 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so that's the first piece is efficiency of messaging, I think is one of the advantages of micro learning. And the other piece is just because the nature of the format, I think it can be in more places than sort of a e-learning course in the LMS. So if I need something on my phone to do a task in a factory or on the floor or wherever I'm at, micro learning on the whole is more suited to the whole concept of the right person, the right place, the right time. And so I think those to me are the two big things of why micro learning is so popular.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I think,
indeed.
Indeed. Yeah.
I think
I agree.
from what we've been doing at the moment, and I think one thing that ties into a lot of this is looking at the data as well, kind of evidence-based practice of what's working for the people that you're working for. So it may not always be the same, I guess, but it's all about context, right? It's micro-learning is useful for certain people in certain situations, like Mike was saying. So I think the learner choice aspect comes into this again of what works for that one person may not work for another. The way we've tried to build our content here is that we've built smaller modules and then compiled them into larger learning programs and paths and that kind of thing. So that for those people who do enjoy blocking out a big chunk of time and sitting down and getting their head down and getting rid of all distractions and doing that, they have that option. But equally, you have those people who, you know, especially at big levels of seniority, people in the company who may not necessarily have the luxury of that time. They can go in, they can do the bits they need to do, and they can jump back out. And the system then that we employ will remember where they left off to avoid, because I think that the risk could always be, if you are doing little bits of learning here and there, you can waste some time finding your place again if whatever method you're using to learn isn't kind of up to the task of keeping up with where you are.
Yes.
Well, I always have a problem with the whole micro learning concept, because let's take two extremes. Okay, so you going on Google and getting an answer for something and you call it out micro learning, that's absurd.
This is gonna be fun.
I'm gonna micro learn. I get it up from Google. I learned. Kudos to you, but that's not micro learning. That's good, I don't know, typing and using search engines. So that's one thing. Okay, so that's one extreme. The other extreme, which is, can we teach pathology using micro learning? I would wish, or the book of pharmacology, for instance. I mean, I would hope for it, maybe by a pill or an injection sometime 20 to 100.
Well, I think Mo, I was hoping Mo would speak to this, like just the definition of what it is, right? And I think that's where you're
I went to it. Yeah, that's why. So I'm gonna thank you for introducing it, because that's exactly why I wanted to say that. So I'm gonna be quoting someone that I do really respect a lot, who's Karl Klopp, and his book Micro Learning, Short and Sweet. So and also Dr. Robin De Felice. So they said that micro learning basically is an instructional unit that provides short engagement in an activity intentionally designed to elicit a specific outcome from the learner. So Micro-learning is not taking a 6-hour training, chunking it, putting it into biteable bites, and hooray, you got micro-learning. No, you need to think, okay, so is that chunk, bite, nugget, call it whatever you want to call it. Call it John for all I care about. Is John going to help that person reach a specific outcome? Is it satisfying a specific instructional unit? Would I be able to measure it? Would I be able to put a metric to it and say you managed to learn something out of it or not? And when I say learn out of it, we don't just say the words understand, learn, and know. We need to say, okay, she was able to identify this. She was able to perform something, assess something, come out with a specific, controllable, measurable outcome. So again, Karkov said it amazingly. It's an engagement. So engagement can be in the form of something that you watch, something that you go through, something that you need to work on, and so on and so forth. And in order for you to go into micro-learning, think about those 3 main tenets. And that's why I left a takeaway message that has this explained. You need to think about the utility, why you're using it, what kind of the utility, I'm so sorry. You need to think about the utility, you need to think about the action. You're using it for what a specific action. So utility can be, you're using it for performance support, for course augmentation, using it for people to remember something. And then when you're using it for an action, it could be for reinforcement purposes. It could be to highlight a specific value. It could be to have a challenge thread. It could be to put in session activation. It could be a post challenge. It could be for preparation purposes. And once you know the kind of utility and the action that you're working on, and it can't change because you could use performance support and do preparation, performance support and do challenge thread, you could do that through possibly e-learning, infographics, videos, articles, quizzes and challenges, you name it, as long as that engagement is satisfying a specific outcome. If not, then I don't know what you're doing. Basically, let's just not give it a name.
And I think that last point, Mo, goes to whatever you're doing. Does it micro learning or anything else for that matter? Like that's the key point. So I think if you don't have that foundational thing of the why you're doing it and how to do it correctly, then the format is really irrelevant. So I'm glad you called that out.
Yes, sir.
Amazing. So another trending topic, and I'm sure that you will love it too, remote work. How do you think training can improve people's experience and performance when working from home?
I think
I love remote work.
I love that sound.
This question is tricky.
Yeah, it is. And
Tricky
there
even
are
for
a lot of
us,
elements-
Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, indeed.
I think there are a lot of elements to this as well. You know, and I think that's what makes it tricky is people's experience and their performance are gigantic topics. I think one thing that is an important part of that question is the word people, and the fact that we obviously, if it's in a business context, you have particular goals, you have particular things, outcomes that you want for your business, and that's really important to bear in mind when designing anything for training, because obviously, as Mo was saying, you're working towards those outcomes, right? You're sometimes working backwards from what you want and then thinking about how you get there. I think the other thing is as well, the people are an integral part of this, and if they're not, for whatever reason, feeling prepared for the task, then it can be a much more difficult process to get those results you want as a company. So I think one thing that has become a really important topic, and I say has become, it's always been an important topic, but I think it's become even more important for people, is making sure that people's well-being is taken care of. So I think for various reasons, for quite a few years now, it's been a stressful time for a lot of people, and we are, I think, as trainers, to also be able to provide resources for people, so that they are able to better help support their own well-being, but also help support their co-workers. And by no means saying that you can replace kind of medical professionals or anything like that. But I think it's really, you're put in a very fortunate position to be able to provide people with some materials as well that may be able to help them in terms of things like imposter syndrome, or anxiety at work, or whatever it may be. And thinking about some things that people can use, some techniques to be able to kind of better handle these stressful situations, or even difficult conversations that they might have with their co-workers. So I think when people see training as like a self-improvement exercise rather than a chore that they have to complete, I think this aids companies in kind of getting their goals over the line, but also giving employees power over their schedule in this remote work environment is another huge thing. I think we hear a lot about trust in lockdowns, companies not trusting their employees to do their jobs properly, keeping too close an eye on them, and giving people the impression that, you're just a kind of a resource to us. And human beings don't like being treated that way. And I think in a training capacity, you're in a great position to be able to show people, to firstly encourage your companies to take that part of things seriously, but also to encourage your employees to take their own health seriously as well, their own well-being, and put themselves in a position to do that learning. Because if you're frazzled, you're not going to be able to absorb some of this learning that we're providing for people as well as you could otherwise. I mean, I'm just scratching the surface there, but they're just some thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think there's another angle too. I'm not sure if this was the intent of the question, but the angle for sort of L&D people like us is actually remote working has been one of the silver linings of the pandemic, because I'm sure a lot of people have previously, prior to the big remote working shift, work from home was, and a lot of the options and tools and digital platforms that have come about because of remote working. And in the past, the answer was oftentimes, no, we can't do that. And so one of the things the pandemic has done is it's eliminated that excuse, because obviously we've been able to do an incredible amount of things remotely. And so as L&D people, that's opened up this entirely new toolbox, I think, of pretty amazing digital tools with lots of potential that before we may have had trouble getting access to or getting approval for. And I'm sure, Mo, you have something to say too around both of those sides of that question. So
my only issue is, I 100% agree with both of what you're mentioning, but see, we talked about this at the beginning, that with all the toolboxes and weapons of choice that started to manifest, comes a lot of choices, comes a lot of anxiety, comes a lot of distraction, and that's the issue. And then someone will be like, oh, you got distractions. Here's the software that can help you. I'm like, enough with the software. I mean, I have already had anxieties because of the software. You're putting an antidote in the form of another software that can help with this, which is a problem. So I think one of the main issues with remote working, because they notice that when you're working remotely, you're working more, okay? And that's not good. That's awful. Because at the office, I get off the office, I go past my Florina's desk, I go say hi to Mike, I stand with him by the water cooler, let's go grab lunch somewhere. But here, I'm just seeing Florina over a screen, which is the same screen that I might be taking a training to, or it's the same screen that I'm going to be going through an LMS or a MOOC through. And the issue is, what we need to work on is distraction management. I mean, I need to make sure that I'm taking enough time to have a breather, not with the same time that I would take to go past by Florina's desk, but at least to get a breather. And also to contain the amount of work that I'm going on to, because what happens is, speaking to a person that has 3 screens in front of him, I'm looking here and here and here, I am everywhere. So I need to do this for my email. Oh, hold on. I have this design that I'm working on. Oh, but Adobe Illustrator is open up here. I need some distraction management, not through an app. I need processes. I need help. And there's something also, communities of practice. I need people that can help me out. And I like all of the new social media, not new, but newly used social media like Yammer, like Slack, which are social media for work. So I'm only dealing with people that I want to deal with for a certain period of time. I can open up Zoom to work together, so I get the sense of the office. I can get people aware of how this can help you, not something that can burden you. So I can still bridge the same concept of you're in an office, you're in a work setting, you're not alone. And at the same time, you're on your own, you're responsible, but it's okay. You still have people to back you up.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with you about that. And also about this loneliness, sometimes you can feel lonely during, yeah, because it's true, but yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Thank you so much. I mean, we are a fully remote team, and we absolutely agree with you, with all of you.
I think what Mo's saying is a perfect example of that well-being thing as well, is that it's again keeping things front of mind, that it's human beings that are doing all this, not machines. So it's just making sure that the focus is always on, okay, so in Mo's case, for example, it's talking about, okay, so we need to make sure people have the bandwidth in their brain to be able to tackle that. And I think also it's our responsibility to be able to not overload them with things, but also give them the resources when they need it. So I completely agree with that as well.
Yeah, and I think that to have certain knowledge about like time management, and you have to have the things that you want to achieve for that day specifically, and what resource do you want to use if
Let's
you
call it
have any
self-management.
training.
The new terminology now is self-management and attention management.
Attention. That's what I was going to say. It's really about managing your attention. What are you giving your attention to, which is not an easy task.
This is a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
It's very challenging, the work you do, guys. Really.
Just gets more and more difficult, doesn't it? Let's all quit now.
Especially because you're producing. I mean, you're remote and you're producing. Have more work. Let's work on more. You can't excel in it.
Sometimes the best part of all of these digital devices is the off button, right?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's knowing when to switch off, isn't it? Definitely.
And being fortunate enough to be in a culture that's okay. That's another key part.
Now there are apps to do that. Apps that can close other apps and apps that can shut it up for you.
Love it.
Or the apps that pretend like you're clicking like you're actually working and you're not.
I have to look for that one.
That's what I heard.
Somebody's gonna buy your idea.
That's a true.
Okay.
That's a true thing. That's a real thing.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, guys. This roundtable discussion is very funny, so thank you so much.
Have had fun.
Yeah. Okay, so if you want to, we can continue with some new questions. And this time we would like to talk about strategy. And here goes the first question. So what are the strategies that work best for you to engage your audience during your online training?
I think something we've greatly improved on as a company is explaining to the learner why they're doing something. One of the stumbling blocks maybe that I certainly had was training people up on something, getting them really good at doing a certain thing, and never at any point explaining why we were doing it in the first place. So I think to get that buy-in and to get that engagement, I think people like to know that there's a reason they're doing something. One example more recently is that we also use the training platform that we have access to pull data through into our work management software, so that we can assign work to people, freelancers around the world, based on, you know, are they creating work to a certain standard. And to ask somebody to do training modules like that, especially if it involves a thing like a practical task, which might take quite some time, to ask them to do that and to do it to a good standard, I think you need to explain to them, justify to them why they're doing it in the first place. You need to show them the end goal. So in this case, for them, it would be working with a big client. There's a lot of work there, but we need to ensure a certain level of quality. And just by explaining that to people, we've had a much better reception of some of those types of training material, where they're not thinking, well, I'm just wasting my time here because I don't even know if anything's going to come out of this for me. I think if people see the value in the training, whether it's something like that, where it could be monetary for them, or even if it's just showing them the learning outcomes, it helps a great deal, I think, for them to be able to, you know, they need a motivation in some capacity. And I think that ties into gamification, which I know is a much discussed topic as well in learning. I think if you look at games themselves, games of any kind, a lot of them, the whole thing is, the whole drive is that there is some kind of reward. It might not be monetary, but it might be the reward of victory or the reward of having learned something else, improved yourself. But just explaining what that reward is, I think certainly in my brain, having a carrot and stick mentality to things, knowing there's a reason I'm going over there to do something, has really helped.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of looking towards marketing and see what marketing does, because marketing shares with the learning field. We have the same common goals, like we're trying to get people's attention, we're trying to get them to do something new, some new behavior. But I think a lot of times marketing does it a lot better. And I think there's three, it kind of boils down to sort of three main things. And the first one is kind of reflecting back to micro learning a little bit, is streamline your content. So again, how can you pare it down? I used to work at an agency, and we called, hey, we need to unpack this a little bit more. So it needs to be really clear and simple and understandable. So that's the first piece. And then the other piece that I think often gets missed in the L&D world is people respond to emotion. So, you know, we have this lizard brain, and if you send them a 32-page report, nobody's going to read it. But if I can tap into some sort of emotion, of whether it's humor or sadness or some sort of human emotion, that's what our subconscious minds sort of react to. And so that emotional piece, I think, is often missing. And then the last piece, which helps both of the first two, is make it visual. So the visuals will help you convey that emotion, and it also helps with that streamlining piece. So streamlining, emotion, and visuals are three big things, I think, that would improve almost anything, no matter what you're doing.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, definitely worth building in things like that. I think interaction as well, something we've seen a huge success with. I think everyone can imagine or remember a time when they've been reading a piece of text or they've been watching a video, they get to the end of it and realize they haven't taken any of it in. Whereas with the interactive aspect there, and again, I can only speak to kind of the experiences I've had myself, and I'm sure the people on the call have had separate experiences as well. But if you are, so take Genially for an example, and our gracious hosts, if there's pieces of information there and you have to go looking for some of it, I think just that element of interaction means that you aren't going to mindlessly skip through things if there's something that you have to do. If there's even a smaller task is clicking on something to find out what's behind it. It's just engaging that part of your brain where you're like, okay, I am actually actively participating in this rather than just being in the room whilst it happens. I think that's a huge help as well. So, but I think that emotional component, that's a really, really good point. Something I'm going to definitely be exploring more of, I think, after this call.
Okay, let me pick
Indeed.
up on what you both have mentioned, and I'm going to put it up into two main things. And it's interesting that one of our local chat groups of training and development, we're talking about that today, which is let's try to think about training. But I'm not talking about e-learning at this point. I'm like talking about learning and training, and try to steer away, take a roundabout and go somewhere else, away from lecturing, away from force feeding people information, but rather try to facilitate more. And when it comes to facilitation, it's not like I'm gonna take a person and going to train them how to facilitate. That's not the point. The point is your design, your learning design has to cater more facilitation abilities, has to cater more activation possibilities for the learner. So what happens more often is that we build our learning into bites that need to be read, that need to be went through, instead of something that I can engage with, instead of something that I can interact with. If it's something in the classroom, then the lecturer or the instructor or the trainer is delivering training, when instead they should be facilitating a learning. And that's number one. Because when people work with something, they start to learn. And according to Bob Pike, he did say that people do not argue with their own learning. People do not argue with their own data. If people came to the data on their own, they learn. If people start to work with something on their own, they start to assimilate and accommodate the data into schemes inside of their mind on their own. And also, we need to make sure that we know this, because it's an important thing. Adults are babies in big bodies. So we need to treat adults like babies, okay? Adults are babies in big bodies. They like to have fun. They like to have humor. They like to engage. And learning is directly proportional to the amount of fun you have doing that learning. And learning will never take place until behavior has changed. And behavior will never change until you anchor more fun, which is exactly what you said, emotions. And let me borrow the words of Aristotle in this, which is the second part, is that we have three main appeals that can let people get persuaded by. It's either pathos or logos or ethos. So ethos is the credibility. According to David Perkins, according to Bob Pike, who cares? I don't even know who you're talking about. So the means of appeal simmer to no more than 5 to 10%. Well, according to the process, according to the steps and the process, no more than 20, 25% means of appeal, because it is logical. But you know what? I don't care about logic. But if you tell me pathos, if you give me a video, if you tell me a story, practical example, something like a branching scenario, like a game that I can have fun with, that's a 65 to 70% appeal. So that doesn't mean that we should shift everything into stories, but we put stories ingrained within it, logos, and it has to be credible with the ethos. And when we build it, we facilitate it, not force feed it to the people. And that is one of the main strategies that we do when we do our designs here at the Catalyst, that we look at how will people have an engagement rather than how people would be injected with lump sums of data.
Thank you, Mo. We totally agree. So we have 5 minutes, and wrapping up, I'm gonna ask the last question. Well, we have 5 minutes. So how does gamification, I know that this plays an important role in terms of engaging audience. So how does 5 minutes? 5 minutes, like microlearning answer.
I'm just gonna
gamification.
I'm gonna say this into four things, because I knew
oh my
that this
God.
cost 4 things, because most people will be like, give them points, give them badges, make leaderboards. I hate that. Just hate that. You know, try to think about gamification as a strategy to motivate people rather than points and badges and leaderboard. Okay, it's not Pac-Man. It's people that we're dealing with here.
Okay.
So include narratives, include stories. That works. Okay, stories is a form of games. Okay, include people into stories. That's a good mechanic. I have a complete article where I wrote about this because it's the overarching mechanic of many other mechanics. Include embedded feedback, because when people get feedback in a game or they get reward on what they do, they continue on increasing in their own mastery level. They can get better as you go. But if they go on to something aimlessly, the game would be ruined. Think about any game that you know. Second, agency, autonomy. People love to have control. Give them more control. That's why we use branching scenarios. That's why there are escape rooms on Genially, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, progression. If the learning that you're having doesn't have an Everest to go to, and also not only Everest, but also swamps and down the valleys, so they can actually fail and go up, then it will be a problem. Take those, think about them, build a gamification, and also until you have a solid learning design. If you don't, do a solid learning design first, and then think about the rest.
Okay, I like it.
Smashed it. It not only that was 3 minutes, 2 minutes to spare, and he smashed it.
1 minute, 1 minute for Mike, 1 minute for you.
I'm going to give my minute to Mo. He did such a
1
good
minute to
job.
say goodbye.
I think gamification, I think generally speaking, most kind of knocked it on the head there, but I think the clients are more comfortable from our perspective purchasing services from companies they feel have well-trained employees. If we go into a pitch with a potential client and show them the material that our staff gets trained with, it activates those parts of the brain that engage people so much when they're playing video games and that kind of thing. It's the same thing that it does when we provide our internal staff with this learning material. And I think those techniques that Mo's talking about, it's something we can always improve on, something we can definitely improve on, but we've already started to see results with those exact kind of things Mo's talking about, so I couldn't agree more.
And
Thank
I can do my piece in 10 seconds. Go read Mo's stuff and go get Carl Kopp's book. And I can't do any more than that in any more time. So that's the best place to do in 10 seconds or less.
Well played.
Great.
Okay, so we have
And use Genially for
one
that.
more minute
Yes.
before we say goodbye. I don't know if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question to these amazing experts. So 1 minute.
There is no rush.
No rush. No. You
Now
just
there's
have 1
question.
minute and that's it.
I'm checking the comments.
Yeah, I'm checking the comments right now. So let's see. I'm gonna pick a random one. La 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 la. Hi. Okay, Monica asks, how do you find a balance with your personal life and a home office?
Oh,
10 seconds to answer that.
Man, that's really tough. Here's my 5 seconds or less. Make sure you have a door that you can close and walk away, or a door that you can close and be, insulated inside. That's mine. A door that closes with your home office. That's huge.
yeah.
Amazing
huge
one.
Yeah.
My answer would be that I love mythologies. I've always did. I mean, I have like the Iliad right here between my books. That's a mythology. And I don't know how to do a balance. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how to do that. Mythology.
Okay. Well, that's from us. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Reese, for joining us today and sharing so many insights. And a big thank you to all of you out there who have joined us on the other side of the screen. So see you at our next event and stay tuned for more. One more
Thank
thing.
you, guys.
Free trial. We just put the link on the comments, on the chat, so you can request your free trial right now.
Thanks so much for having us, folks, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, people.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.